think you're all set. Thank you very much to all the participants for your patience. We're sorry about this technical issue. However, everything is set now, and Tove and Monica are ready to provide you with a very beautiful presentation and discussion. So I'm going to leave the scene to both of you, Tove and Monica. To everyone, if you have any question, please use the chat function, and Monica and Tove will have a look at it to make sure we can answer your questions. Enjoy the presentation and have a good show, actually. Bye.
Okay, so I also want to welcome you to the workshop, and I want to introduce Tove Pedersen. She is a partner in the LIVESEED project. She's employed by SEGES in Denmark, and she's part of the Danish Agricultural Food Council, which represents the farming and food industry in Denmark. And she is mainly involved in the development of organic variety trials and the preparation for the temporary experiment. And I would like to give the floor to her to give her presentation. And since we have quite a number of people in the room, I would like to ask you questions that come during the presentation that you don't understand, to put it directly in the chat, and I will collect the questions. So now I give the floor to Tove.
Thank you, Monica, and sorry for the delay, and welcome everybody to this workshop. It's nice to see that there are so many people with interest in this subject. And as Monica said, my name is Tove Pedersen, and I'm employed at SEGES in Denmark, and we're partners in the LIVESEED project. And today I'll be representing a working group of a subtask in LIVESEED Work Package 2 concerning variety testing. The agenda for the workshop you can see here. First, I'll introduce you to the new categories of plant reproductive material in the new organic regulation. And after that, I will talk about existing definitions of organic varieties, which are more detailed than the new legal definition. And then I'll look into the registration process of varieties and different breeding strategies for organic breeding, and the possible pathways to registration within the framework of the new legislation. And after this, I'll summarize challenges that we have collected through surveys and interviews in the LIVESEED project. And finally, I will talk about the upcoming experiment on organic varieties and suggestions on how to work with organic varieties during this experiment. And then we'll have some time for questions and discussions in the end. So, in the new organic regulation, there are two types of plant reproductive material included. One is organic varieties and the other is organic heterogeneous material. Organic varieties are, according to the legal text, characterized by a high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity between individual reproductive units and results from organic breeding activities, and is at the same time defined as a variety according to the Council regulation on community plant variety rights. A traditional variety is, among other, defined by the expression of the characteristics that result from a given genotype or combination of genotypes, and that can be distinguished by at least one of these characteristics and can be propagated unchanged. For organic varieties, breeding activities must be conducted under organic conditions and shall enhance genetic diversity, rely on natural reproductive ability, on agronomic performance, disease resistance, and adaptation to diverse local soil and climate conditions. On the other hand, organic heterogeneous material is defined by common phenotypic characteristics, also with a high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity. And this material is not a variety, neither a variety mixture. And organic heterogeneous material is not really the subject of this workshop, but it's mentioned here only for the distinction to organic varieties. So in conclusion, both types of reproductive material are defined by a high level of genetic and phenotypic diversity. Organic varieties are more stable and can be propagated relatively unchanged, and is a result of organic breeding activities. And organic heterogeneous material cannot contain varieties and can adapt to local growing conditions by repeated natural or human selection. This figure shows examples of the inherent genetic diversity within different cultivar types. The highest level of diversity is in the heterogeneous material of, for example, composite cross population and cross-pollinating land races. And open-pollinated varieties have a higher degree of genetic diversity than inbred lines of self-pollinating species or hybrid varieties or clones. And in between, there are some variety types with intermediate level of genetic diversity. And the variety types are, of course, related to the different species. And organic farmers, they use the different variety types for different production systems. And in the legal definition, organic varieties, they have a high degree of genetic diversity, but also variety types with a lower level of genetic diversity within the cultivar can be derived from organic breeding programs. So this contradictory issue should be addressed in the upcoming discussions on organic varieties. And now we'll move on to the existing definitions on organic varieties. IFOAM have set up some general principles for organic plant breeding and organic varieties in the 2014 norms for organic agriculture. And breeding must be sustainable and enhance genetic diversity and rely on natural reproductive ability, be creative and open, and take a holistic approach and respect natural crossing barriers. And plants must be fertile and in viable relationship with the soil, and organic varieties are obtained from such organic breeding programs. It's specified that selection must be performed under organic conditions, and that there must be no contamination with genetic engineering techniques, and the genome and the cell must be respected as impartible entities without technical interventions. And again, the natural reproductive ability must be respected. This definition goes beyond the definition in the new regulation in respect to disclosure of breeding techniques and accepted breeding techniques. And EcoPB, which is the European Consortium for Organic Plant Breeding, they have also described organic plant breeding in a position paper from 2012. I'll not go through all the statements here, but we'll mention only some of them that adds to the previous definition. Organic plant breeding should aim at matching the needs of the complete value chain, sustainable use of natural resources, sustained food security. Oops. Is that music coming from my computer? Just a minute. No. So, sorry about that. Just have to go back to presentation mode. There's the Spot Me session that turned on. So, hope you can see the screen again. So, I was talking about the position paper and from EcoPB, sorry. And ethically, possibilities for further breeding should be kept open, and natural crossing barriers must be respected, and reproducibility must be respected by production of non-hybrid varieties. And finally, there should be no patenting, and participatory breeding should be promoted, and also diverse breeding programs to enhance agrobiodiversity. And finally, there's a private label where breeders have the possibility for certification of organic varieties. Bioverita has existed for almost 10 years, and the label is for both organic and biodynamic breeders. This label has many similarities to the EcoPB position paper, with a holistic approach to support sustainable and social development of agriculture. And all breeding steps must be performed under organic conditions, and hybrid varieties are not accepted. Breeding techniques do not allow interference below cellular level, and reproductive ability must be respected, and also no patents are allowed. So now I'll move on to talk about the registration process and breeding strategies for organic farming. First, just some basic information about the different steps in the registration process for new varieties, for those of you that may not be so familiar with this process. A variety must pass a test called DUS, where it's tested whether it's distinct, uniform, and stable in order to define whether it's a variety and if it's distinct from other known varieties, and if it's sufficiently uniform and stable over time. And agricultural crops also have to be tested for their cultivation and use to see if they're an improvement compared to other known varieties. And this is like a safety for the farmers as well, and it's also used in the marketing of the varieties by the seed companies. And if the variety passed the tests, it will have a name and be listed on a national list, which gives access to sell the seed of the variety. And the DUS test also has another purpose, which is for variety protection. And if the variety is new and passed the DUS, the breeder can be granted a variety protection. And this gives the ownership and access to claim royalties on seed. This is a very important financial resource for conventional breeders. And finally, the variety then can be multiplied, certified, and marketed. For organic farmers, organic seed can originate from different breeding strategies, as Monica also told earlier. And seed can originate from either organic breeding programs as organic heterogeneous material or organic varieties in the new context. All varieties can originate from conventional breeding programs. Some of the conventional breeding programs also have generations of the breeding under organic management, or they test breeding lines under organic conditions to find varieties that are adapted to organic farming. And also seed can originate from varieties that are bred for conventional farming and then multiplied 1 year under organic condition. And this scheme gives an overview of the existing and the new pathways of registration that are foreseen and introduced in the new legislation. The organic heterogeneous material is not a variety and should not go through the normal registration procedure. And organic varieties are suggested to be tested in DUS trials that are adapted to organic varieties and in organic VCU trials for arable crops. And the stapled line here is to indicate the option to have a traditional DUS trial if no adapted protocol is needed for the organic variety, or if variety protection is requested by the breeder. And I'll get back to that later. And varieties that originate from conventional breeding programs or partly conventional breeding programs but are bred for organic farming can be tested in traditional DUS equal to the current situation, and in organic VCU trials if this is a possibility in the given country and for the given crop. And the conventional varieties can be tested as usual in traditional DUS and VCU trials. So the scheme indicates the different types of varieties that could be recognized for organic varieties that are bred and tested under organic condition with adapted DUS, organic varieties that are bred and tested under organic condition with the traditional DUS, and varieties that are tested under organic condition with traditional DUS. And now I would like to get back to why there is a need for adapted registration procedures for organic varieties. In LIVESEED, we have done interviews and surveys to investigate the challenges that are faced by organic breeders. And first of all, organic farmers need varieties adapted to their farming conditions. And it's important for them to have varieties that can cope with the various stresses that are faced in organic agriculture. And the market size is still small compared to the conventional, and this is a challenge for organic breeders since they have to meet the same demands and costs of registration as the conventional breeders. And organic breeding initiatives often aim to have a broad portfolio of different crops and cultivars, and it can be difficult to finance these initiatives by royalties and seed sales. So often other sources of financing are used in organic breeding initiatives. And organic breeders, they cannot invest as many resources to fulfill the thresholds in the registration trials. Yeah, and then finally, some breeding techniques are not accepted by some organic farmers and consumers, and this limits the choice of the farmers. More specifically for the DUS trials, some challenges have been experienced with the strict uniformity requirements and the experience of a trade-off between the uniformity level that's required and the inbreeding depression experience for some open pollinated varieties. And some have also reported challenges with the lack of proper references for open pollinated varieties, and especially for fruit. There were challenges with the market acceptance of varieties, as a new, for example, an apple variety is very much dependent on the acceptance of the market. And the very expensive process of registration does not give any guarantee for the market acceptance. And for the VCU, more specific challenges is the lack of organic testing sites where varieties can be tested in the target environment. And often the yield potential and the yield stability under low input conditions are not considered in the existing trials. And traits that are important for organic farming is mostly not evaluated. And this could be traits like weed competitiveness or seed-borne diseases. And also crop mixtures are not tested in pure stands, and organic varieties are compared to references with the untreated conventional seed. In LIVESEED, we did some interviews in 15 European countries, and it turns out that only a few countries offer the possibility of organic VCU trials, and only in a few crop species. And then another few countries offer VCU trials where there are some supplementary trials under organic conditions. And this scheme shows that the status quo with organic VCU in Germany, Austria, and Denmark, and then supplementary organic trials in Austria as well, in France and Latvia, and then there's one organic location in Switzerland. And the challenge is that there's only a limited demand for the organic trial, which makes it also the financing a challenge. So, to address the challenges, a temporary experiment for organic varieties is being set up as part of the new organic regulation. The experiment should run for a period of 7 years and establish the criteria for the description of the characteristics of organic varieties and determine the production and marketing conditions. The experiment is not yet launched, but implementing acts will be developed, and the scope of the experiment is foreseen to include both fodder plants, cereal, wine propagating material, beet seed, vegetable seeds, seed potatoes, oil and fiber plant seeds. And it's expected that the member states will be authorized to derogate from certain existing legal provisions on DUS and VCU testing. And the Commission have asked member states and organizations to designate experts to working groups, and adopted DUS protocols should be discussed in small subgroups prior to the experiment. And the outline is 5 participants in each group with representatives of CPVO experts, examination officers, member state experts, and stakeholders as breeders and seed companies. And in addition, there should also be a representative from DG Sante. The preparatory work will focus on priority species that has been identified by member states and stakeholders in a consultation process during the spring of 2020. And the priority species that have been chosen are important crops in organic farming, and they are wheat, rye, maize, soybean, lucerne, potato, carrot, kohlrabi, tomato, and onion. As preparation for the temporary experiment, a 1-year investigation on organic varieties of carrot and kohlrabi has been conducted in 2020 by Bingenheimer Saatgut, Louis Bolk Institute, and Nachtimbau. And the trials were funded by Rat for Plantenrassen, or the Board for Plant Varieties, the Dutch registration authority. In this trial, they have been working with the DUS protocols and how they can be adapted to organic varieties. And the criteria in the protocol, they have been characterized. I'm sorry, now this happened again. I apologize. I'll just close this down. So just to start again, they've been working with these DUS protocols and how they can be adapted to the organic varieties. And the criteria are characterized by the relevance of the farmers, the traders, processors, and the consumers and breeders. And the DUS system is not originally set up to look at the relevance, but to distinguish the varieties. So this is quite new to do it, to look at it this way. And then they go also a step further to evaluate whether some of the characteristics should be optional or if they should be mandatory. Yeah. To allow some more genetic diversity in the cultivars, of course, and just see, yeah. So the suggestion is from this experiment that the mandatory criteria should ensure the distinction of the variety, and then that the optional criteria should also be described in the process, but should not be used in the decision for the registration. But then they would be available in case they would be needed later. And if distinction would not be sufficient from the mandatory criteria, then selected optional criteria should be used for the distinction. The criteria used for the distinction should be sufficiently uniform to ensure the distinction. And the use of only mandatory criteria should also allow for less uniformity in the optional criteria. And the use of frequency of trade should also be investigated. And these open pollinated variety, as in this case of this investigation, would not necessarily be stable over time. And it could be discussed whether there should be a possibility for adapting the variety description in case of changes over, for example, 10 years in non-essential criteria. And finally, I will present some recommendations from LIVESEED for this temporary experiment. These recommendations are still in process, and for the temporary experiment, there should be a discussion on this definition and characteristics of organic varieties, and not only variety types with a high level of genetic diversity should be included, and the use of trait frequencies and other methods to distinguish organic varieties from organic heterogeneous material should be tested. And organic breeding does not always start with an initial cross. It may, for example, start with an off-type, and therefore there should be a minimum number of years defined under organic breeding program to ensure that the variety is adapted to organic conditions. There have been some discussions of maybe minimum 3 or maybe minimum 5 years for annual crops. And also the breeding techniques during the whole process of breeding should be in line with organic principles, and the breeding techniques should be enclosed. And for the DOS, it should be tested whether the adapted protocols can be used for the registration of organic varieties. And the issue of variety protection should also be addressed. And furthermore, the experiment should also include VCU testing under organic conditions with adapted protocols and thresholds. And the possibility for optional VCU in some cases should be discussed, for instance, in the case of minor crops for human consumption. And also the registration procedure itself should be addressed, for instance, the possibility for some kind of pre-registration test marketing period for fruit varieties to test the market relevance. And fees for registration should be addressed to ensure that fees for registration are fair and realistic. There are examples of double pricing for testing organic varieties. And also the labeling and marketing of the varieties should be discussed, and a special mention in the European Common Catalogue for varieties for the different types of registration. And farmers should be also ensured the freedom of variety choice in the organic seed database to fulfill the different needs of organic production systems. And now for the last slide, I think that we should now open the floor for clarifying questions and comments in the chat. And after that, I would like you to spend some time to answer some questions. But first, I think we should take some clarifying questions and questions for the presentation, and then I will return to this last slide with the questions.
Okay, Tove, we got some questions from the chat, and the first question was, do you expect that the demand of organic varieties to increase along the European target for phasing out pesticides and adopting agroecological farming practices in conventional farming in the future?
Yes, I would definitely say that at least varieties that are adapted to these conditions. So there's certainly some common interests in conventional breeding and organic breeding. There are more common goals and an increasing interest from the conventional side to also meet these expectation of further restrictions in the future.
Okay, then we have another question that is about the organic varieties, and you indicated that organic plant varieties having a quite low level of diversity and organic heterogeneous material being only CCP. But what about dynamic mixtures which behave as an open pollinated population? Could they enter the organic heterogeneous material definition?
Yes, there are different categories of heterogeneous material, and I didn't mention them all here in this presentation. This was just to illustrate how there are different degrees of genetic diversities within different types of cultivars. But I don't want to go into details with the organic heterogeneous material in this workshop, because this is separate. This is a separate issue.
Okay. Then there's the next question coming, and it's about if you allow a very weak definition of DUS, how could you guarantee during the year and in the value chain that the seeds are identical in performance and quality to the original seed?
There would still be the normal procedure that there would be testing of the seed. So this whole procedure would not change. But of course there will be the possibility to look at whether there should be allowed some deviation from the original seed, since at least for these non-essential criteria. Since of course if you allow more genetic diversity, this will also allow the variety to change more over time. Monica, you're welcome to also add if you have something you want to add to the answers.
Yes, and I think the discussion that we also had is that when it comes to distinctiveness, university, and stability, we actually want to have a lower to reduce the number on the uniformity and keep it only to those traits that are relevant for the organic farmer or the processor or the consumer. So there is also on the side of the farmer and the organic breeders quite a need that we want to have it stable for those traits that are really relevant for the organic production. There's another question coming from, it's about organic heterogeneous material, how this material is ruled or not ruled by phytopathology certification.
I wouldn't know that.
Maybe then I can answer this. It is foreseen that in the organic heterogeneous material there need to be a seed certification, and it has to comply with the European plant health legislation. So that and that would it's in order to avoid that any epidemic or pests are spreading out from the organic heterogeneous material. Then there was one question. It seems that it's not possible to protect a variety with a reduced degree of homogeneity and stability.
Yeah, but that's of course a difficulty, and that's not really an expectation that it will be possible, but I think that it should still be addressed during the temporary experiment, whether this would be possible or not. But of course, this is a major challenge. But then on the other hand, many organic breeding initiatives may not need this variety protection because, as I tried to explain previously, there's many different means of financing organic breeding that are not that dependent on the seed royalties. And there should still be an option to have the DUS test with the full spectrum of characteristics to allow to have the variety protection if this is what the organic breeder needs. But it should definitely be discussed during this temporary experiment.
So then at the moment the chat is empty, so I think we still would have time for one or two questions. Just meanwhile, I want to say you that there's also one of the participants. Thank you very much for your very clear overview and asking if your slides will become available, and if yes, where.
Yes. I expect the slides to be made available on the LIVESEED webpage. Would you not agree, Monica?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So, and were there any more questions?
Yeah, no, some more questions coming. Can varieties out of breeding for organic programs also be organic varieties suitable for organic production, as it is mentioned in the new legislation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because, of course, there is some a gray zone between these different categories. So this is something that needs to be defined. This would also depend on how, if it's possible to define a number of years that organic varieties must have been organic breeding program, if the BFO programs would fit into this definition with the number of years, and there would be no problematic breeding techniques used, then it would be a possibility. But then again, it would depend on how the definition would be settled for these organic varieties. But I think that it's important that these types of varieties under all circumstances are accredited somehow in that they have been tested and bred for organic farming. So that there should be a category for this type of varieties as well. Okay, so maybe Monica, should we move to the questions?
Yes, I think it's good now because I see no more answer, and maybe you can mention
Yeah,
the question again and what you would like to have.
Yeah, I'll just, I was thinking that it would be nice to have your input for a few questions. And I put the questions here on the last slide. And the first question that we would like to have your input for is, what do you think should be the minimum number of years under organic breeding for an organic variety, and why? And you can just put the question number before you put your answer in the chat. And the second question, are there specific breeding techniques that you think that should be excluded from breeding of organic varieties, and why? And the third question, do you think that it should be possible to have some variety protection even with adapted DUS, and why? And the fourth question, should VCU testing be optional for organic varieties, and again why, and in which cases? And then if you would just take your time to put these answers in the chat, then we would read them all carefully afterwards. We probably won't have time to go through them now, but then we will use your answers in our future work. So now I'll just let you answer to the questions. You don't have to answer all of them, of course, and you can just answer if you find them relevant for you, and if you have an opinion on them. So please go ahead.
Yes, and don't forget to put the number in front of your questions, and we will give you now about 7 to 8 minute times, and then we see how far you are, and maybe we get some prolongation since we started late, but this I'm not sure. So
I think we are on time anyway.
Yes, we're quite good in time. You made up.
Okay, so I think that this workshop is coming to an end in order to stay on time. And there's still a few messages popping up in the chat. That's really nice. I thank you all very much for all your input. And as I said before, we will read them all carefully and take it into consideration in our future work. And then I would also like to thank you all for listening. And I don't know if you want to add something, Monica, at the end of this workshop.
Yeah, I also would like to thank everybody, and I'm screening a bit your answers, and I think that will be very helpful for our discussion, as there will be quite some different opinions, and I think that's always helpful to see things from different angles, and therefore we are very happy for your contribution, and we have to apologize for the difficult start that we had in our session, so we hope that will become better later. And yeah, thanks a lot to all your contributions, and stay with us for the rest of the day.
Yeah, and I think that I'm supposed to show this last screen, that you should return to spot me after this workshop. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone. So yes, now we'll go back to Spot Me. Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.